5 or 10. I had Blaze Bayley, Holy Grail. I had Fate's Warning, Sunburst. I had Almanac, Thornbridge. I had Amirith. There's a lot of bands that I could have considered. And just like the college football playoffs, you don't necessarily have to win your conference to win the national championship. So I took an album that actually didn't even win its own category, but I think 10 years from now will stand the absolute test of time, and that is Dante's When We Were Beautiful.
Wow! Really?
That is my album of the year.
Wow! So, give us a little more on that, Biff. Why?
Okay, well, as we already talked about...
What would you consider your runner-up was?
Well, I would say my runner-up, and this was tough. Holy Grail was right there.
Yeah.
Almanac was right there. Evergrey, I could have thrown them in the mix. But I think, as we talked about before, just a few minutes ago, their opening track on that CD immediately pulled you in, I think. And it was something that you could say, if you were going to introduce someone to the genre, would this be the song? And I think that Dante, all the way through that CD, encompassed not only a genre, but I think over the next several years, that is the sound of the genre's future. I really believe that Dante, although not that well known, and we've seen this the case all the way going back to the 60s and 70s, where bands that weren't really all that well known ended up being the band that paved the way for other pioneers. We saw that with ELO, in the 70s. Yes, they were well known, but who would have known that progressive rock and metal would have followed the keys and the time changes of Kansas and ELO and Styx and, so on and so forth. I think Dante's sound, their musicianship, the way they arrange things, all point towards not only a brighter future for them, but I think for the genre.
Wow. I didn't see that coming, Biv. Well said. All right, Lacey, album of the year. What do you got?
Yeah, that was hard too. There were several in the running for that as well. Evergrey, of course, was one. DGM also came up for me as a possibility. But kind of going along with my favorite prog and my favorite song, Mirath Legacy, I think, is my album of the year.
Wow. So what would you consider your runner-up to be? And why did Mirath win that one?
Well,
If you had a runner-up. I did.
Yeah, like I said, it'd be either DGM or Evergrey. It was hard to pick exactly because they're just a little bit different from each other. But I picked Mirath just because there were no filler songs. Everything was great on it. I didn't get tired of it ever. I love just the way it opens, with a cinematic soundtrack opener, Jasmine, that leads right into Believer. Mm-hmm. And it just sucks you in right away, and then it kind of takes you for the ride all the way to the end. And, I like their uniqueness. I think that kind of just helps them stand out a little bit more. And just the fact that there's no bad song on the album, and it just sounded fantastic. And I never got tired of it.
Lacey, I don't know how we are not like best friends. Because it's so weird music-wise. If you and I ever hung out, we would just listen to the same stuff the entire time. Because I can tell you that Mirath was not in my top two, but I would definitely consider them top five. But I'll tell you, my runner-up was also, like I just mentioned a little bit ago, my song of the year, which was from Evergrey. Of course, we just mentioned Passing Through. And that album, of course, is The Storm Within. Close. And I'll be honest, I went back and forth this whole last week going, dude, I also went back and listened to our reviews on the podcast of these two albums, between The Storm Within and who eventually was the winner of this, because I wanted to hear what I said at the time and then listen to them again and see if anything's changed, if anything's different. And it's really close. Just to give you an idea, I gave a 9.5 out of 10 to The Storm Within from Evergrey, and I gave a 10 out of 10 to the Album of the Year winner, and that is The Passage by DGM. I just am a self-admitted fanboy of these guys. When you listen to Momentum in 2013, I thought it was their best stuff. When you listen to Frame before that, I thought that was their best stuff up until then. It's like every album they come out with, I go, this is the best thing they've done. And then they make another album, and it's better than that. And that's exactly what this is. You start out with Secret Part 1 and 2. You can't start an album better than that. I challenge you. Maybe with Jasmine and Believer would be a close second. But, I mean, just the Secret Part 1 and 2 are incredible. Animal's great. And then, of course, I mean, speaking of, Tom and Evergrey, you have Ghost of Insanity on that album as well. I mean, there's just, I mean, Mark Basile has such a great vocal range. His soft vocals are incredible. His clean vocals are powerful and just very unique. I love his sound. Simone Maroney, who, of course, is just a guitar virtuoso, just incredible. He writes riffs that are just, it's a combination of, it's Petrucci but less noodly. And it's one of those things, like, this is the band, DGM to me is who Dream Theater should be now, and they're not. Like, just the perfect blend of melody and some beauty and some flat-out heavy progressive riffage. It's just so well done. And there's not a song on this album, with the exception of Disguise, which is like a 2-minute interlude, that I would skip past. This entire album is absolutely killer. I rated it a 10 out of 10 because it is a 10 out of 10 in my world, and it still is at the end of the year. So for me, I just laugh because I don't know how many times, and again, guys, I can only say, Lacey, back me up here. Biv, back me up here. None of this, we had no conversations about any of this until we hit record. So I can't, it's just funny to me. While Biv and I were on the same page with Almanac, I don't know how many times either you mentioned the song that I considered to be number 1 or number 2 almost the whole time. Lacey, it's super crazy weird.
That's funny.
Yeah, that's really what it is. But I don't think you can go wrong with any one of these albums we mentioned. When We Were Beautiful, again, I didn't think Biv was going to go in that direction. I know that he was a big fan of the album, but I didn't think he was going to go there. So that's interesting to me. You cannot question Legacy by Miraf because it's a great album as well. And, of course, The Passage by DGM is solid as well. And speaking of all the albums, all the songs, even the disappointments, even all the stuff that we talked about, if you're on this little thing called Spotify, by the time you listen to this podcast, we, of course, would love you to, and this is what we end up doing a lot, especially Biv, I know, has really kind of bulked up his CD collection recently, and I know Lacey is always posting on Facebook, her album purchases that she bought, where she got, like, crazy deals on Scar Symmetry sales for Black Friday, and it kind of bothered me that I didn't take advantage of that as well, even though I already have 2 of the 3. But anyway, I can tell you that if you yourself don't feel obligated to run out and buy the stuff we're talking about, but if these bands are new to you, or if these albums are new to you, there's no better way than at least check them out, listen to them. You can just simply go to the 2016 According to Metal Awards playlist on Spotify. We'll share that out and tweet that out and also put that on the Facebook page. So check it out, listen to some of the stuff that we talked about and go, holy crap, this is really good. And if you really dig their stuff, then buy it the traditional way like we do after the fact ourselves. But just some really good stuff that I don't understand why anyone said that 2016 was not a good year for metal, with the exception of Opeth. Just kidding, and a couple other bands. But for the exception of Opeth and a couple other bands, this was a great year for metal, and a great, especially towards the back half of the year, just, man, great album after great album that was coming out. curious what 2017 will bring, but I will say this, this being the first ever episode, or first ever year that we've done the show, from episode 1, for some crazy reason, Lacey, maybe it's because it was Lance and Mirath we talked about a lot on the first episode. We were like, hey, I'm going to check these guys out and listen more often, but I really do appreciate that. And I can tell you, I can't really speak for Biv here, and I'll let him speak in a second, but your friendship has been very, very valuable to us. We started the podcast with really no relationship to anybody. I'll let Biv share with you how we had a relationship with Lance King to start with. I'll let him share that story, not me. But other than that, we really didn't have any connections with anyone. But then we got to find out, like Biv said, that you are the Where's Waldo of heavy metal. And, there's a lot of people I friend requested that probably saw, well, he's friends with Lacey, so all right, never mind. I guess I'll accept his friend request. And so it's allowed us to have a lot more guests on the show and allow us to network within the metal community at a much better way than I think we could have without your friendship. So for that, I'm forever grateful. And I could say that I hope and big plans for the podcast and big plans for some guests and some things that I'm thinking about that I haven't even talked to Biv about in 2017. So really looking forward to what the future holds for the podcast, what the future holds for LadyObscure.com, and what the future holds for you continuing to like our show for some crazy reason, Lacey. So thank you so much for joining us. But Biv, by the way, did you want to share with Lacey how it is that you guys got connected in the first place? Because to me, it makes me laugh every time you say it.
Oh, it's a hilarious story. But Lance and I kind of, it's one of those you friend somebody on Facebook, and then for the goof one day, I guess he just hit me up to play Trivia Crack. And so he challenged me to a game, and then we ended up playing. We were very competitive, and one of us would win by a very narrow margin and challenge the other one to a rematch constantly. Wow. So we went back and forth like this for a while, and then we just started talking some more. And then I'm like, hey, we're thinking about doing this show, and would you come on? He's like, yeah, sure. And then when I actually hit him up for it, he's like, oh, my God, you're really doing it. I'm like, yeah, we're really doing it. And so against his better judgment, he came on anyway. And, the rest, as they say, is history. So to Jason's point, we absolutely relish the friendship that you've given us, the, recommending friends to us and opening doors for us that we probably wouldn't have had otherwise. We really do appreciate it. Can't say enough thank yous for it. And you're welcome on the show anytime. Anytime you've got some breaking news with Lady Obscure, anything you want to share with us, whatever the case may be, you're welcome on anytime.
Well, I really appreciate it. And I appreciate your guys' friendship, too. It's been great to connect and be able to just chat music and do what we know.
It absolutely has, Lacey. Well, thank you for joining us for our first ever, the first annual According to Metal 2016 Year in Review Awards. We'll have 2017 and hopefully many, many years after that. We'll have a bigger budget next year, though, hopefully. We'll see what the future holds for that. But I can tell you that the future for metal is brighter than ever, and I can't wait for 2017 to hear what's in store for us. But we will be able to, of course, hear more about that on the podcast and read more about that on LadyObscure.com with our guest reviewer of the day and this episode, Lacey. Thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me again.
Hey, this is Tony Piccoli from Imminent Sonic Destruction. You're listening to According to Metal.
Well, folks, end of the year, end of the episode. Thank you so much for listening to it. Hopefully you agreed or even disagreed with some of our nominations. That's okay. We all agree and disagree with each other even during the podcast when we were recording it. But learned some really interesting news in the beginning of the show. And, of course, you got to hear what our nominations were for the albums of the year, the disappointments, best song, you name it. We talked about it here on this show. Kind of a special edition, a little different than how we do things, but we're so glad that you listened. And, again, I cannot stress enough, if you're a heavy metal fan and you're hearing this show maybe through a link that somebody shared on Facebook or online or something, thank you for listening. We're glad you're listening. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast so you can get every single episode we do. 2016 was the first year for us doing According to Metal, it is also a year in which we had a hiatus or two in the middle of it, of life getting in the way of some things. But I can honestly tell you that 2016 was our first year. I am super excited about what the future for the show holds and for 2017.